Welcome, everyone. Today, we're completely rethinking everything you thought you knew about getting rich. In this explainer, we're going to break down the actual mechanics of financial intelligence. And spoiler alert, we aren't talking about raw IQ or how many degrees you have on your wall or even how many exhausting hours you grind out every week. Instead, we're looking at wealth as a system. It's a specific formula that acts as a massive multiplier for your life. Okay, let's dive into this. So you might have actually noticed this phenomenon in your own life. You take two people, right? They have the exact same educational background, literally the same natural abilities, and they even work just as hard as each other. But fast forward a few decades, and one of them ends up with a net worth that is 10 times or maybe even dozens of times greater than the other, a literal 10x difference. How in the world does that happen? Well, it actually isn't luck. It all comes down to the presence or the absence of a very specific multiplier. And that multiplier is financial intelligence. The source material defines this not just as some static trait you're born with, but as a really dynamic closed loop. It's made up of 4 parts: how you understand money, how you earn it, how you make it grow, and, absolutely crucially, how you spend it. Since these elements have a multiplicative relationship, getting just one right completely amplifies your overall wealth. But getting one wrong, that can totally wipe out everything you've worked so hard to build. So to make this roadmap really clear, we're going to break this explainer down into 4 parts. 1, build wealth by earning, not saving. 2, grow wealth by riding the tide. 3, spend by fixing the right problems. And 4, we'll tie it all together with the snowball framework. All right, part 1, build. Earn, don't save. The fundamental rule of this very first pillar is that wealth is built through proactive creation, not endless, exhausting frugality. The author actually ran this really fascinating personal experiment to prove it. They wanted to buy these meaningful, lifetime milestone gifts for their family. So initially they tried the traditional route, just aggressively cutting expenses. They spent 20 minutes outside fixing broken solar lights in the yard just to save $30. They downgraded a $500 celebration dinner to a $100 one. And yeah, they cut waste. But they pretty quickly realized that at that incredibly slow pace, saving up enough for those gifts was going to take forever. So they just flipped the script. They started accepting paid speaking gigs they had previously been turning down. And boom, suddenly they had the money. The realization here was huge. If all you do is pinch pennies, you'll never truly get rich. Wealth has to be actively earned. Now you might be wondering, how do you actually earn more without just completely burning yourself out? Well, what's really interesting about this is the dramatic difference in profit margins. Let me introduce you to Mr. Zhang. He's this highly financially savvy businessman who ran the Italian computer agency for Olivetti over in China. The author, who was working as a standard downstream agent at the time, was totally happy making a slim 10% profit margin just by giving clients discounts. But Mr. Zhang, his operation was literally marking up the Italian factory prices by 100 to 120% before even selling them downstream. So when the author marveled at this massive markup and asked Mr. Zhang why he priced things so steeply, Zhang just smiled and said, "Otherwise, how would I make money?" The absolute key takeaway here is that Mr. Zhang didn't just double the price to be bold or arrogant. He did it because Olivetti was a totally unique brand. Clients literally could not get those products anywhere else. If you have uniqueness and you solve a very specific problem, you set the price. Financially intelligent people don't chase those exhausting high-volume, low-profit traps. They amplify their unique abilities to get multiple times the return for the exact same amount of effort. Okay, moving to part 2. Grow. Ride the tide. See, earning money is really just the foundation. Because your time is strictly limited, you absolutely have to position yourself for exponential growth. To understand this, we can turn to the legendary investor Charlie Munger. He famously said, "The first rule of fishing is fish where the fish are. The second rule is don't forget the first." Financially intelligent people don't just work super hard wherever they happen to land. They proactively move their careers and their capital to exactly where the money already is. And this is perfectly illustrated by the story of 2 friends. Both of them were brilliant biology PhDs from top-tier universities, literally the exact same background. The first PhD stayed strictly in his lane, taking a job at a national lab. 20 years later, his career had totally stagnated and his income stayed pretty low. The second PhD? She took a completely different path. She joined Google early on as a project manager. Now, initially, she was way overqualified, mostly doing grunt work, just coordinating resources. But she was a great problem solver without any sense of entitlement. So as the tech boom just exploded around her, she rose through the ranks to become a director at Google, eventually getting poached by a competitor for massive wealth. She honestly didn't work any harder than her friend in the national lab. She just chose a track that completely multiplied her abilities. And, this perfectly illustrates the exact same reality when it comes to investing your actual cash. Money that's just left sitting idle inevitably loses its value over time thanks to inflation. It literally shrinks. But money put to work in the right track, that grows, even if you start with a pretty small principal. Choosing the right track multiplies your capital, exactly like choosing the right industry multiplied that Google director's career. All right, part 3. Spend. Fix the right problems. So, you've earned it, and you've grown it. But the third hurdle in this loop is knowing exactly how to allocate it. Let's bring back our brilliant businessman, Mr. Zhang. Zhang had a personal income of over 1 million Hong Kong dollars a year, which was an absolute fortune at the time. So how did he maintain the relationships that fueled all this income? By very deliberately spending an 8,000 to 10,000 Hong Kong dollar public relations budget every single month. He took clients to the absolute best restaurants. He could have just pocketed that cash, but he didn't. He knew that spending generously to build trust and real business relationships would return his investment hundreds of times over. Zhang actually once shared a piece of wisdom that is incredibly profound in its simplicity. He said, "Never skimp on office paper." Think about it. We have all worked for someone who tries to save a single penny by wasting a whole dollar of your time. The author actually worked for a miserly CEO whose relentless frugality literally killed his business because nobody wanted to work with him. Wasting an employee's valuable time trying to save on a single cheap sheet of paper costs the company vastly more than the paper itself. Intelligent spenders invest in efficiency and goodwill. But just as important as knowing what to spend on is knowing what money absolutely cannot solve. Money cannot buy love, and trying to use it to fix emotional problems is a total recipe for financial disaster. Consider this pretty sobering statistic from the source text. Getting a divorce in the United States can cost a person over 70% of their accumulated wealth. 70%. So despite his massive wealth and all the attention it naturally brought him, Mr. Zhang was incredibly careful. He ignored office gossip, he took his time, and he eventually married a really unassuming, ordinary woman. He completely separated his money from his emotions. Today, people are constantly mixing the two, right? Giving away half their assets before marriage or going into massive debt for a lavish wedding just to prove their love. Financially intelligent people understand that these are entirely separate dimensions. Trying to fix love with money is literally like trying to put out a fire with wood. You just end up burning through all your resources. Let's move to part 4 and see how this all builds together with the snowball framework. See, all 3 of these traits, they don't just operate in isolation. They form one cohesive system. We can wrap this whole thing up by looking at Warren Buffett's famous metaphor. He noted, "Life is like rolling a snowball. The important thing is finding wet snow and a really long hill." This perfectly captures the closed loop of financial intelligence we've been breaking down today. Your ability to build, finding your uniqueness and earning proactively rather than just saving. Well, that determines the size of the handful of snow you actually start with. Your ability to grow, positioning yourself in lucrative industries and investing wisely, is finding that wet snow and the huge long slope to roll it down so it multiplies. And finally, your ability to spend strategically. Investing in relationships but keeping your money far away from emotional traps ensures that your massive snowball doesn't just melt away into nothing. Understanding this loop gives you a truly massive advantage. But information is really only useful if it's applied. So want to leave you with a direct challenge right now. Reflect on your own financial habits. Look at those 3 pillars. Which of the 3 do you currently do best? Are you absolutely great at building, but terrible at growing? Or maybe you're a phenomenal investor, but your spending habits are just melting your snowball. Identify your weak link and fix the loop. Because honestly, if your snowball is rolling down the wrong hill, it doesn't matter how hard you push. Ask yourself, which one of these 3 traits is actively melting your wealth right now? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer.